Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to review the entire Maiden Lane series by Elizabeth Hoyt. All 12 books. Okay, so I am a huge fan of Elizabeth Hoyt. I started reading her, I only started reading her in the fall of 2020, but I was immediately hooked on her writing. I think that she does an amazing job at captivating you right away and creating stories that really get you invested in the characters. She handles a really perfect balance of passion and love, and she usually has really great plots throughout the whole book that really keeps you interested. So I finally started reading the Maiden Lane series in March. I read the first one in like March 4th, and I just have been marathoning it since then. It's kind of taken over my reading life if you've watched any of my vlogs, and I am in love with it. This is one of my favorite historical romance series. I love pretty much every book in here. Even though there were only 2 books in this 12-book series that I rated 3 stars, I had a few, I think I may have only had 1 or 2 that were 4 stars and the rest were 5 stars. I just love this series. I think that if you love historical romance and you like sort of a darker vibe to your historicals, and you want something that has a really great plot that is threaded throughout each book, but also has a romance that is front and center, I think you would love these books. I really do. So the Maiden Lane series is set in 1730 London, so that is the Georgian time period. So it's a little bit earlier than Regency and what we're usually used to. And the interesting thing about this series is that it takes place mostly in the streets of St. Giles, which is kind of like the slums at that time. And a lot of it is surrounding the crime that is happening there, and a house that is a foundling house for orphans and children who need someone to care for them, and there is a overarching mystery that kind of takes place within, I would say that probably within, like, this series is grouped sort of within books of 3. So the first 3 books focus on one aspect of that world, the next 3 another, and so on until the very end, and they're all kind of connected in that way. But I will also say that even though it is probably more satisfying to read the series from book 1 to book 12, I do think there are some books that you could pick up and just read as standalones. And as I go through each book, I'll mention if I think this would be a good standalone book to read or not, if you just kind of want to read one. But overall, I think it's worth reading all 1 through 12 because you see characters show up early on, and then you see them get their books later, and you see characters who you read about in the first couple of books that show up way down the road, and it's just a really fun experience to see their life and to get a little bit more backstory into what happened to them and where they are today. So, something that I think Elizabeth Hoyt does really well in this series specifically is that she handles a lot of sort of very dark and complex themes that could be triggering. So I will also say that a lot of these books will deal with sexual assault, child abuse, some violence, death of loved ones, and things like that. So I think that if you're sensitive to those, maybe be careful about certain books. Not all of them are very dark. I feel like the first 3 are sort of dark, and then the last 3 are probably super dark too. There is not, however, very much, if any, explicit on-page descriptions of that dark subject matter that happens. So I also feel like Elizabeth Hoyt handles her character development really well. She is really able to show a character, just little bits and pieces of them. Maybe you see them show up in book 1 or book 2 or book 4 or book 5, and she's able to carry that thread throughout the whole series until that character gets their final book. But I would also say that even if you're just picking up one book here and there, you're still going to get a full character arc, you're still going to get a completed plot in that one book, and you're also going to get a complete romance with a happily ever after in each book. Each book has its own romance, it's not a cliffhanger, you get the resolution for that couple in each book. So that is also something that I think is really great about this series, because I don't know that I could have read a 12-book series and not have had a happily ever after that whole time. So let's go ahead and talk about each book. I'm going to give you my star ratings, and then I'm going to tell you which ones are my favorite. So I'm going to give you star rating, a little bit about the plot of each book, and then we'll go through the ones that are my favorites and the ones that were my least favorite. I only have 2 that were my least favorite, so you'll see those as they come along. So the first book is Wicked Intentions, and would you believe I have all 12 copies of this series, and I have step backs for every single one of them, except for one of my favorite books, which is book 4, doesn't have a step back. So I am on the hunt for that. So I'm going to show you the step backs of them because they're stunning and iconic and just beautiful. This is the first book. It's Wicked Intentions. I know that a lot of people don't love this book as much as they love other books, but when I read this book, I gave it a 5 stars and I was completely invested and hooked into this world. Looking back on it and reading some books that come later on, I would say this is probably, I don't know, like, it's probably maybe a 4.5. I still feel like it's a 5-star read for me just because so much is done here and it was so different from other historicals that I had been reading. So this book follows Lazarus Huntington, also known as Lord Care, and he is looking for a murderer who is on the loose. He's trying to bring them to justice. And he ends up meeting Lady Temperance, who is a widow, and she is running the foundling house that her parents sort of started for orphans to come and, you know, it's basically like an orphanage. She's running that. But the problem with the foundling house is that they're running out of money, and she is desperate to find some money to keep it going so that she can help all of these children. When she meets Lazarus, Lord Huntington, they end up getting into a bargain where he will introduce her into high society to help her find a benefactor for her foundling house if she sort of gives him the rundown of the streets of St. Giles so that he can find this murderer. This book has a ton... They're falling. All the books are falling. I have them in my lap. This book has a ton of mystery, it has a ton of romance, and it also, which is trademark for Elizabeth Hoyt, is just full of passion and heat, and it is just completely compelling from the first page to the last page. Some of these books do end with a little bit of a mystery that makes you want to pick up the next book, but it doesn't have to do with the couple that is in this book. It's just sort of like this plot thread that gets introduced that for a future story that kind of piques your interest so that you want to pick up the next book, and that happens here, and I really, really loved it. So this book is a wonderful introduction to the series. I would highly recommend it if you want to just sort of see a taste of what this world might be about. I think this is a perfect place to start. It is the first book, and it was a 5-star read for me. Okay, and book number 2 is Notorious Pleasures, and this book follows Lady Hero. She is the sister of a duke, and she is engaged to another titled man who, this will be like one of those classic title marriage arrangements that is going to really set her up in society. However, he is super, super dull and boring, and she's just really not interested in him at all. She ends up meeting Griffin, Lord Griffin, sort of in this very interesting and roguish encounter in the beginning. She catches him with a married woman, and that sort of sets the stage for how she perceives him throughout the rest of the book. But she does have this attraction to him, and he definitely is intrigued with her too. Come to find out, Griffin is actually the brother of the man that Hero is engaged to. Now, the plot in this book is that Lady Hero is basically trying to stop all of crime and all of, especially like, drink and vice. She wants to put a stop to that because she believes that is the cause for all of these orphans that are happening, and she's a big part of the foundling house and helping all the children there. And Griffin actually has an underground gin making operation, so when she finds that out, they're definitely at odds, and although they do have a very big attraction. Now, I would say that there is a little bit of an element of cheating in here, because she does get together with Griffin while she's still engaged to Griffin's brother. There aren't really any emotional connections between Hero and the man she's engaged to, but I'm just putting that out there in case that may turn anybody off. I rated this book 3 stars, and that was largely because I just didn't feel the romance between this couple. It was just largely based on their physical relationship, and this is one of the few books that I feel like Elizabeth Hoyt didn't balance that out for me really well. I did really like the overall mystery that was here. It ends again with one of those cliffhangers for a plot thread that's going to come up in another book that I really had high hopes for. So, but overall, when I read this, it just paled in comparison to the first book, and it was a 3-star read for me. Okay, book number 3 is Scandalous Desires, and this book is really fun because we have a river pirate, Mickey. And Mickey is definitely a man of vice and sin, but he has a heart of gold. Like, he is one of those heroes that is so, like, crusty and hard and, like, this big, fierce guy, but he's just this soft puddle of goo for the woman that he loves, and he ends up meeting Silence, the heroine, in here. Silence is also part of the Fambling House, and she has sort of adopted this child, this young child, and raises it as her own. Mickey comes to her and is like, that's actually my child, and I'm going to take it back. And Silence is really heartbroken about that, but Mickey's like, oh, but you can come with us. You just, you know, you can't have my child, but you can come with us. So Silence ends up going and traveling with them, and big mysteries ensue. And honestly, the best part of this book was just really, really watching Mickey, who was this fierce pirate, just completely come to mush for his heroine. It was adorable. He was definitely one, I would say that he's an alpha male hero in this series, and that he projects a lot of gruffness and a lot of sternness, but he's really just a big softie for Silence. So I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars, and that's largely just because he was definitely an unlikable hero for me in the beginning, and I didn't really love him. However, this book, book number 3, ends on one of the biggest cliffhangers in the series, and by cliffhanger I mean nothing with this couple or this specific plot, but it lays a plot thread for what will happen in book number 4. So let's talk about book number 4, because it is one of my favorites in the series. Okay, Thief of Shadows is one of my favorite books in the entire series. This is probably, I have 2 books in the series that are just top notch for me, and this was one of them. So the first 3 books in the series really deal with the orphanage and sort of the grittier side of St. Giles with, you know, we have the side plot with the river pirate, and we have a little bit of mixing of classes, and we have the poor and destitute people of St. Giles mixing with some of the aristocracy, which is kind of fun to see that contrast. So this book really starts a series of 3 that I call the Batman books, and it's basically the ghost of St. Giles, who is just a vigilante hero. He wears a Harley Quinn costume, and he goes along the streets at night trying to find people who are either killing or hurting or kidnapping people. So in this book, he is after the person who is killing or kidnapping young girls. So this hero is one of my favorite heroes, and you don't know that he is the ghost of St. Giles until this book. So this character is mentioned in previous books, so when we get the revelation, it was kind of really fun to realize, oh, that's who the ghost of St. Giles was this whole time. So I'm not going to tell you his name. It does tell you on the back of the blurb. If you read it, you'll find out who it is. So if you want to read this in order, don't read the blurb if you want to be surprised about who the ghost of St. Giles is. So he ends up being rescued, the ghost of St. Giles ends up being rescued one night by Lady Isabel, and she basically saves his life, and they start to have this relationship, and this is just a wonderful book. We have a virgin hero, he's a virgin Batman. It is just honestly so freaking good. He's very much a man who is ruled by rules, and like he wants everything to just fit a perfect way, and she kind of comes and just messes his world all up, and it was just so good. I loved this book so much. Okay, and then we have book number 5, which is Lord of Darkness, and this is another one of the Batman books, so we have a new Ghost of St. Giles in this book, and it is Godric. Godric is a widower. His wife, who he loved very dearly, has passed away, and he is trying to move on from that. He ends up marrying Lady Margaret, who ended up in a compromised situation when her lover had passed away and she was pregnant with his child. She ends up miscarrying and losing the baby, and is so saddened by that because she wanted to be a mother so badly. So she ends up trying to convince this man who married her. It wasn't a love match, it was a marriage of convenience. Godric, the ghost of St. Giles, she ends up trying to convince him to have a child with her, and he doesn't want to do that because he doesn't want to tarnish or ruin the memory that he has of his wife who passed away. It's really just a beautiful, quiet story. There's a little bit of an age gap. She's a very young heroine. He's like 37. There was some mention in here about how he was geriatric and was a silver fox, and I'm like, he's 37, come on now. But I guess in comparison to, I think she's maybe like 20, 21. It's quite a bit of an age gap in that way. It's not a Crystal video if the battery doesn't run out, right? Okay, I may be in a different spot. But let me finish talking about this. So this book was really just a beautiful love story between these two. It was so lovely watching both of them sort of overcome their grief and still love the person who they were with before, but to find a new second chance at love with someone else was truly beautiful and just so sweet. And also, like, I just love this step back. I know that I haven't been showing you the step backs. This is one of my favorites of all time. It's so beautiful. Originally, I ended up giving this 4 stars because I was kind of irritated with how they just kept saying how he was just so old at 37, but when I was vlogging about this and I was talking about it, I realized how much I loved it. So this is a 5-star, 4.5, 5-star. Really definitely enjoyed this one a lot. Okay, and then we come to book 6. So this is another one of the Batman books, and this hero is very much like an actual legitimate Batman in that this is a new Ghost of St. Giles. This is the Duke of Wakefield. So this is Maximus, and his parents were murdered, and he also has a valet who is very Alfred-esque, and there are a few scenes in here that describe him training where his name's not Alfred, but his Alfred comes and talks to him and sort of tries to provide that moral center to Batman, which I just really super enjoyed as a huge Batman fan. Like, I just really loved that a lot. So he is the Ghost of St. Giles. He ends up meeting Artemis, who is actually not a member of the aristocracy. She is a lady's companion to Lady Phoebe. There is sort of this idea that Lady Phoebe and Maximus might marry because they're both titled people, and Maximus is very much into that idea that he needs to marry a lady to continue the title. But he falls in love with Artemis, and they sort of begin working together when Artemis discovers that he's the Ghost of St. Giles, and she threatens to, I guess, unmask him, for lack of a better word, if he does not help her get her brother out of jail, who has been wrongly accused of murder. So there's a lot. This book has a really complex plot. It has a lot of interesting relationships in here between all of the different characters. I think that this is a really good example of how she builds and develops her characters and relationships, and I really, honestly, really enjoyed this romance. But this does something where that I don't really love, where the hero compromises his love, but then doesn't necessarily want to marry her, and I just really don't like that. So that is what pushed it to a 4-star for me. But other than that, I mean, you do get a happily ever after, right? But initially, he's sort of like, I can't marry you because you're not a lady, even though he, like, compromised her. So that is a little bit of a downer for me, but overall, I really enjoyed this. I thought the Batman vibes were super strong. It was just a really fun, mysterious, romantic, steamy book. I loved it. Okay, and now we come to probably my I can't decide. I can't decide between book number 4 and book number, is this 7? I can't remember. And book number 7. So book number 7 is Darling Beast, and this book is honestly pretty much perfection in my opinion. This is a 5+ star read for me. I absolutely loved it. We have a damaged hero. The hero in this is actually Apollo, who was Artemis's brother, who was imprisoned in the previous book. He ended up being beaten in jail so badly that he is now mute and is very, very, very much this big, huge man that people are kind of afraid of, but he's really very tender and gentle on the inside. He ends up moving into this rundown theater to take care of this garden. The heroine is Lily, who is the premier actress at that time in London, and she has a small son. She also comes to move into that theater, and that is how they meet. Their first meeting in here is honestly one of my favorites ever. She is just so struck with the beauty and power of this man. And she also catches these moments when he is very tender with her young son. Very tender, very patient, very loving. Like, the son and Apollo's relationship was one of my favorite parts of this. This also has a really cute Italian greyhound, and it's a big part of the plot. It's really super cute, and nothing happens to it. It survives the whole time. So I'm very happy about that. But I love this book. I loved the dynamics in their relationship. I just thought it was honestly perfect. It was just so well done. This, I think, is one that you could pick up and read. I think it would read well as a standalone. I feel like this is the beginning of a new series of 3 in my mind. That's how I'm separating them. So we had the first, which were just sort of the gritty books of St. Giles that had a little bit of that aristocracy meets street crime. And then we had the Batman books. And now I'm not sure how to really qualify these into what kind of category, but the next three specifically feel very romantic to me. They feel like there's a big emphasis on love and romance, and also, again, like all of these books are equally passionate and romantic, and I really, really love that, but there's just a certain amount of tenderness and love in this one and the next two that I just adored. So this is one of my top books. I have two that are my top favorites, Thief of Shadows and this one, and I honestly can't decide which I like better. If I had to choose, it would probably be this one. If I have to choose one favorite in the series, it's probably this one. Loved it so much. 5 stars, 5+ stars. Okay, and this book is also incredibly sweet, incredibly romantic, just a beautiful love story. This is also a bodyguard romance, so that is super fun. We have Lady Phoebe, who we have seen in a few books previously, and she is slowly going blind over time to where now she can't see anything at all. She's completely blind. And her guard is Captain James Trevelyan is her guard, and he is also sort of a damaged hero in that he was injured in service to the king, and so he walks with a cane and a limp. And it is the story of them really falling in love despite the fact that he feels like he can't fully protect her because she's under threat in this book. That's the overarching plot here, is that she's really under threat of kidnapping. People are out to get her, and he is worried that because of his disability, he's not going to be able to fully protect her. But he also recognizes that he cares about her more than anyone else does, so he is probably the best person out there to protect her. And Lady Phoebe really wants to have her own agency. She doesn't want to be coddled. She wants to still be able to live her life, and I loved the message of that in here too. I loved really how they both fought for one another and how they both were not ever seeing what they each perceived as their own weakness as a weakness in the other person. It was just a beautiful look at agency and love and romance. It really just was a perfectly sweet and soft love story. Oh yeah, and I gave this 5 stars. This was another 5-star read. This is one of my favorites in the series. Okay, and then we come to, I have forgotten which, 12, 11, 10, 9. This is book 9. This is Swedish Scoundrel. This is a really big, sort of like a, this book started to feel a little different to me in that we have a heroine in here who is like the bastard child of a duke, of aristocracy. So she doesn't really have the full title, but her brother is the duke, and so she is still a member of the aristocracy, but not like a full-blooded one. Her name is Eve. She is really very good at like managing money and things like that, and she ends up taking over this pleasure garden that her brother is in charge of, and she's going to try and manage the finances of it. She ends up meeting Asa Makepeace, who actually owns the pleasure garden. Eve's brother is just invested in it, and so she's trying to protect his investment by trying to make sure that its finances go well. She ends up meeting Asa, who is a very, I would say, typical of more recent works of Elizabeth Hoyt's hero, in that he's just this really gruff, stern, tough guy who is really sure that he's never going to fall in love, and certainly not with a woman who he's not even attracted to. And that was something that was really interesting about this book, is that we have the hero and the heroine who both are really not attracted to one another. So I was really interested to see what it was that was going to happen to make these two people see that they have a connection and really desire each other. And I felt like it was just done really perfectly, where we have Asa really start to see and admire Eve and her ability and her mind and her feelings and everything. And because of all of that, he starts to see that she is beautiful to him. And it was so honestly just a stunning look at these two people who really butt heads and don't want a relationship, but then they really end up falling in love. It was so beautifully done. This was another 5-star read for me. It was full of mystery and intrigue and action. Like, you never have a quiet moment in one of these books. It's just engrossing from start to finish. It was again another one of my favorites. This romance really speaks to me, and it was just so different from a typical lady who's beautiful, you know, and a typical duke, and it was so unique, and it was just a great one. 5 stars. Okay, and then we come to book number 10. And that is Duke of Sin. This is a hero who we have seen mentioned a little bit before, and he was really very unlikable. Like, this guy, the opening dedication of this book is Elizabeth Hoyt saying, "This is for everyone who ever fell hopelessly in love with the villain." So I read that, and I was very intrigued, and I had very high expectations, because I feel like when we have a villain romance, it can be so great if it's done how I like it. And by that, I mean, like, I want the hero to have a very good redemption arc, and I want him to not necessarily, well, yeah, I kind of want him to change his ways and to see the good in things because of the woman that he falls in love with. And I really felt like we didn't quite get that enough here. Like, the hero in here, Valentine, is very unlikable. This book reads to me very similarly to a light, dark romance, and that we have a hero who just takes what he wants and is not afraid to, like, offend anybody. And I feel like the thing that really didn't work for me in this one, I mean, I gave it 3 stars. It's still a good read, it's still a compelling read, but it was ultimately not satisfying for me because we didn't get that redemption and we didn't get that love between the hero and the heroine. But the interesting thing is that we have the Duke of Sin in here, Valentine, and the love interest is his maid, who is actually a spy. So that is pretty interesting. But it didn't give me the redemption that I wanted. He never really acknowledges that the behavior that he does and the way that he acts with people, he never acknowledges that that is wrong. Like, he just sort of does that the whole time, and I wanted that redemption arc, and I just didn't get it. However, I will say that I really enjoyed the heroine loving him, and there was a moment in here where she acknowledged that she loved him for who he was, as he was, flaws and all, and she didn't want him to change. So that was beautiful, but this was definitely this is probably my least favorite in the whole series. Definite 3-star read for me. I was honestly pretty disappointed in this, but I know other people, this is their favorite book in the series because they just love that villain vibe so much, but it just didn't work for me. I didn't love the hero. 3-star. Okay, and then we have another one of my favorites in the series. This is book number 11. This is The Duke of Pleasure. We have Hugh in here is our hero, and he is basically the king's secret weapon, and that he goes and deals justice to people out in the streets of St. Giles. And we have Alf, the heroine, who we have met in previous books, and she has always been disguised as a boy. But she's the heroine, she is the current ghost of St. Giles, and no one knows that she is actually a woman. So when these two meet, Hugh actually hires Alf to try and solve this mystery, this job that he's been assigned by the king, and he is the one to uncover that this is actually a woman. And their romance was so sweet and perfect, and there were a lot of really interesting discussions on here about gender conformities that I thought was really, really well done too. And I just loved, again, seeing the hero love the heroine for who she was and loving everything about her that made her her, never wanting her to change or to be someone else. I felt like their romance was so beautiful and so sweet, and it was just honestly one of my favorites in the series. I really love this one. Definitely treads into the darker territory. We have a lot more darker themes that we're dealing with. We have the last 3 really start with the Lords of Chaos and this sort of cult underground ring of powerful gentlemen, and it has to do with children and child abuse and sacrifice, and it's really pretty dark and kind of a little bit strange and odd, but it kind of worked for me too because we've been through kind of a lot of stuff that's pretty bonkers this whole series, so to have these final 3 books sort of deal with the Lords of Chaos was interesting and intriguing, and it worked for me. But these last 3, I would say, are probably some of the most darker books in the series for sure. But the romance was front and center in here, and I just loved and adored this big, strong, beautiful Duke and little Alf, this woman who has been posing as a boy. It was fantastic. I loved it. And this is the final book in the series. This is Duke of Desires. This is book number 12. I was a little nervous starting this because I was just hoping so badly that it ended, that one of my favorite series ended with I wanted this to be a 5-star read so bad, and it completely delivered. I loved this book. This was a 5-star read for me too. This book is full of very complex characters who have been through a lot of darkness, especially the hero. The hero has some pretty severe childhood trauma, specifically parent abuse and sexual assault, that he is dealing with and trying to recover from, and that has a big impact on his relationship with the heroine in this book. We have, again, a Duke as the hero is Raphael. He is the Duke of Daymore, and he really is, he is a scarred hero. Like, his face is very much scarred. And he's sort of the Duke that, like, nobody messes with. Like, they see that he's this dangerous, powerful man, and, like, they don't mess with him. And he is taken it upon himself to really dismantle and bring about this group, this really heinous, awful cult group, the Lord of Chaos, to justice. Like, he wants to dismantle it and finish it because it had a big impact on him as a child. And so he is at one of their cult nights when Lady Iris was kidnapped, and she was brought to this cult night of sacrifice and sin and really kind of gross stuff that is happening there. And he ends up rescuing her and spiriting her away, and she shoots him thinking that he's not rescuing her, that he's going to like terrorize her and assault her. They end up getting married because he is so driven to protect her, and there is a sickbed caretaking scene when she's trying to heal him from his wound, and that's sort of when we see them start, or her especially, start to have feelings for him and start to fall in love with him. She is a widow, and she wants more than anything to be a mother. She wants to be a mother so bad. And in this one we have that interesting dynamic that we had in The Duke and I, where his father just tormented him in a very visceral and violent way. And Raphael has promised that the Duke's line will end with him, so he is not going to be a parent, he's not going to give her a child at all, he wants the line to end with him. And this book did it really well in that there was never a question of consent, there was never anything icky between them, it was just beautifully well done. They end up really falling for each other, like he just is completely gone for her. At first he doesn't really recognize it, and he kind of tries to push her away to protect her, but by the end of it he is just so gone for the heroine and just head over heels in love with her, and it was just so beautiful. Like, this whole series is just full of so many broken characters that have this journey with their love interest as they try to find their happily ever after, and it's just perfection. I loved it so much. This was a perfect ending to the series. It was beautiful, it was romantic, it put to rest a lot of the mysteries that we had throughout the whole series. It was just so much fun, and I just loved it. So there is this sort of lengthy, in-depth video about each book in this series. I absolutely adore this series. Elizabeth Hoyt is a fantastic historical romance author, and if you haven't read any of her books, please do. I do think that this is I feel like this series is her best work that I have read from her yet. I have not completed her backlist, but I've also read her print series, and I have read the Four Soldiers series, and those are also really well, but nothing compares to the vast breadth of really complex world building and character relationship and just epically hot romances. It's just so well done. So if any of these sound intriguing to you, I'd highly recommend that you pick them up. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video and letting me gush about this new series that I marathoned and just fell in love with, and I hope you pick it up. So I will see y'all in my next video.